Grief Stories is not a crisis resource. Please seek support from a qualified professional in your area to meet your unique emotional and medical needs. You're listening to the Grief Stories podcast. I'm your host, Maureen Pollard, a social worker with an interest in helping people find hope and healing when someone they love has died. In each episode, you'll hear a conversation with a guest, sharing their story and insights about what can help when you're adapting to loss. At Grief Stories, we're helping grief make sense, one story at a time. Today's guest is Betsy Fisher, a bereaved parent who's sharing the experience of expressive arts at the end of her son's life and in her grief after his death. Hi, Betsy. Welcome back to the Grief Stories podcast today. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Good to be back. Thanks, Maureen.
Great. So the last time we talked a bit about your son, Marshall, and your experiences with his terminal illness and the end of his life, and some of the ways that grief impacted you and how you moved through it. And today we want to focus more on specifically the way that expressive arts was helpful, both in the end of Marshall's life, but also in your grief. And so I'm going to invite you to tell us a little bit about your journey with Marshall again, just kind of to recap it in case people didn't hear the other episode.
Sure. Thank you. Well, my name's Betsy Fisher. I'm from Tallahassee, Florida. I, a little over 10 years ago, adopted a young man that I had gotten to know out of the foster care system, named Marshall. He was 11, I think, and we got to know one another. And when he was 13 and I was just old, I guess, we decided to adopt one another, as he liked to say. And so in 2013, we became a little family of two, just the two of us. And there were a lot of challenges in the beginning, and really all the way through, as a young man who had overcome so much trauma and loss already in his life and challenge. And strangely or ironically enough, not even a year after the adoption, and we were working hard to become family, Marshall was diagnosed with osteosarcoma, form of bone cancer. And we both, it just turned our world upside down. And we just did what families do and stepped forward and into it and hung on to each other and tried to keep fighting, which he did for 4 years, back and forth to a hospital here in Florida and St. Jude in Memphis, and wonderful doctors and medical teams in many places, and tremendous support that helped us. A lot of that support, which I'll talk about later with you, came from the art community within the hospital, which I would never have been so aware of. And somehow this resilient, brave young man who had already been through so much kept pushing through. And we, for 4 years, and an amputation and a relapse, a metastasis, and more than anyone would deserve, we fought on. And for 4 years, Marshall was creative and resilient. And by May of 2018, we had run out of options that were doable. And Marshall passed away here in Tallahassee, close to Mother's Day, in May of 2018. And so for the last 5 years or more, I guess now, I have been adjusting in identity, processing grief, trying to make some meaning if there is some, and missing him every day. But he was my teacher in many ways, and the lessons I've learned are one of the reasons why I was anxious to speak with you today.
Yes, and we so appreciate you sharing Marshall's story, because in the midst of all of that challenge and pain and all the things that he moved through, pushed through, that you went through with him, there were some bright spots and some places of hope and healing in relationship and for him, and in dealing with the anticipatory grief that was happening. Tell me a bit about how art became important to Marshall's journey at the end of his life.
Well, all through the 4 years that he was dealing with cancer, each day I began to realize more and more he really had some artistic talent. But he also just drew strength, and I used to call it the beautiful distraction, because he was such a traumatized young man in many ways, and to have something to keep his mind off a procedure he was about to have, or um, it could be a simple blood draw, it could be a major an amputation, but to keep his hands moving and building and painting and sketching and drawing was important every step of the way, and all the way through to his death. And I was never um, an artist in the drawing sense of the word. And we used to do, just briefly, I'll share with you, we used to play this sort of a little game in the evenings. Instead of reading to him, he liked to draw. And I said, Marshall, you draw better than I do. And Mama, that's not important. Let's play. You draw, I draw, and we'll always find something good in the other one's drawing. So mine could be a simple hand or a shoe, but he always managed to try to make me feel better about my pathetic artwork. But he was just so creative, and he made more of everything he did. Sock puppets in the hospital, cardboard boxes that became turtles. His imagination just never ceased to amaze me.
Mm.
So much so that when a year after Marshall died, the hospital and I worked together we actually created a small exhibit of patient artwork that they exhibited in the cancer center there just for a month or so. And it was a pretty amazing, pretty powerful thing to people walk through and kind of see some of that.
Well, it would be because I think, so much beauty comes from a place of pain and emotion and trying to move it out of our bodies and into the world in a way that we can manage. And so there might be some really touching pieces, as well as playfulness, which can get lost in the course of treatment and all the serious business of health and wellness and
Right.
living and dying, right? So.
Yeah. Lots of
Mhm.
humor, lots of poignant things now as I look back at them. Some, many times as art therapy, I suppose is expected to do, he could get something out in a drawing that he might not have in a conversation with me. And somebody else coming in with a sketch pad and a pencil could get a little bit more from him many times.
It's true because sometimes the beauty of sketching and painting and sculpting and things like that, is that when we don't have words, and we don't always have words for the painful things that we go through, when we don't have words, sometimes we can express them in images, textures, those kinds of things. And so art can be a really good outlet for life experience and death experience. So talk to me a little bit about how then you became involved in your grieving process with some of the expressive arts therapies as well.
Yeah, I think I had, before I even had met Marshall back growing up, high school through young adulthood, I played piano, I played guitar, I did a lot of creative writing, journaling, even a little songwriting. But I think I had sort of lost track of that. I had to, in a way. I was so focused as a parent and a new parent and a cancer mom and everything else we were going through. When Marshall died, I guess for that first year after his death, I sort of wrapped myself in a lot of the things around me in this house that were his paintings, Legos, clay model figures, whatever things he had made. And a lot of that led me to the exhibit I mentioned earlier as a way to showcase some of what how art had propelled him through that and helped him. And in doing that, some of the folks that helped me put that together in an arts and medicine program at our hospital um, sort of reached out to me and said, what more might you want to do with this? And what if we took some of your writing, which I like to do, and paired it a little bit with Marshall's drawings or your writing about your experiences? And I probably was a little hesitant at first. I'm sure I was, but I had kept a Caring Bridge diary or journal for all 4 years. So I had plenty to work with and so much in my head and my heart. It just naturally started to flow. I think it started with writing. I did a lot of journaling. I still do. And thanks to these folks and some other groups and friends I've worked with, um, some of it's moved into taking something I may have originally written, turning it into a poem or prose piece, and even most recently into songs. Not many, but a few. And I was very hesitant to do that because that seemed like such an old part of who I was. But to my surprise, to kind of bring that back and awaken that by writing about or singing about or writing poems and things about our experiences together and Marshall, it's just sort of been a beautiful joining of the two of us again that I wasn't prepared for, and but I sure welcome. It's been a surprising way to carry on his legacy and make some meaning for myself.
What a beautiful opportunity they've offered you,
Yeah.
right? So in terms of the process, you know, what would you say that the writing and then the songwriting have allowed you to do in a way that without them it might have been harder to do?
It's interesting because you said something a minute ago about when we were talking about Marshall's art, about how sometimes when you can't put a voice to it, you can put it out on paper there. And I think whether it wasn't so much that I couldn't put a voice to it, but I wasn't sure who wanted to hear it in your grief, who wants to listen to me talk and tell more and more stories about my child who has died. And so this became or has become sort of a safe refuge, a personal place where I can reflect and sort of really share a lot of that. And some of it has even managed to, I hope, help somebody else or be there as a reference to somebody else who may want to find sort of this creative outlet for themselves. So I think it sort of comes from that same sort of place. I hadn't really thought of that, but ironically, where Marshall's did is it's the paper is a place, something for me to talk to. That's my person to journal to, and then to look at it myself and really realize all that I've been through and what I miss most about him.
Mhm. I think when I talk about therapeutic writing with people, I often say that, you know, what we carry in our heads and our hearts is really sometimes confusing, jumbled up, swirls around in there, can make us feel a bit crazy or broken. And when we start to put it on the page, we are able to see it sometimes in a different way. We can see it from a different perspective. And that can be a part of our healing because it can help us understand things differently or make sense of them or accept, even just accepting that the facts and the realities can be different when we see it on paper as opposed to
Mhm.
thinking about it, right?
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah. And what would you say has been your, you moved from doing writing, maybe some journal writing and maybe some poetry, and then towards some lyrics and that. What would you say kind of moved you from one to the next? What had you start back to songwriting after it had been dormant for so long for you?
Yeah. It's still primarily 70-80% journaling and writing op-eds occasionally, or pieces towards maybe a memoir that I've thought about writing. Certainly stories I share during certain seasons of the year. And then I think honestly, with the nudging of people who understand that bridge between the arts and medicine and healing, as you said, and some friends and folks at the hospital who have, I think they just sort of gently kept nudging and realized how much I would get from it and needed to do it. And the poetry part, or sort of taking a real live description of something I'd written, from a day in our life together, and then turning it into poetry or prose was not, that came a little easier, but taking it to a level of a song, as I mentioned, I was kind of hesitant about. I don't, I don't know. I told someone this not long ago, that I ever had written a song about something I'd actually been through. When you're younger, at least for me, when I wrote a few songs when I was young, they were all about the silly things high school, college kids write music about. And to really write a song in the last couple of years, I've just two or three I've written, but they've all been about an actual prompt, a photo of something with Marshall, or something he did, or I've shared before in a hospital, or even here at home. And I've written about, and to turn it into something that I've lived through had just an entirely different feel to it. And a pride I had in it in a different sort of way than I felt at all before.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're talking about a couple of things. One is that you've evolved as a person who writes songs because you wrote those beginning songs. I mean, we all begin somewhere, right? And you're right, young people with not a lot of life experience yet tend to write about some, topics that don't feel as weighty, or maybe they're more about characters than personal experience sometimes.
Right.
That's someplace that they begin writing about something that feels important to them, but doesn't have the depth that you do as a more mature person with some life experience and your grief experience. Caring for Marshall and all of the experiences you had with him, challenges and triumphs alike, right? And brought you a much different worldview when you came to writing these new songs in your grief experience, a depth that you wouldn't have had in your younger days. And so that's kind of your evolution, both as a human, and as a songwriter.
Mhm.
Yeah. Now, do you play an instrument?
I do. I learned. I played the piano originally, but I don't have a piano here at the house. So, but I do have a couple of guitars, and that's primarily what I play. And, as you were talking, I was thinking too, I remember one of my hesitancies, I guess, was the question kind of related to playing an instrument. I thought, what is the point of this? Who am I going to play these songs for? Is this just for me? And learning to be okay with that, number one. But secondly, I have had at least one opportunity in the last year to share, to play the guitar and sing those with these same folks from the hospital in a small show of sorts, and tell the story behind the song. And that's, I think, when I really realized that different sort of feeling you were just describing, being able to see the evolution of my own grief and advocacy for causes and sharing Marshall's story. So yeah, so that's been my one time recently where I've, in public at least, attempted to. I'm not great, but I do play the guitar and sing. And then thanks to these friends who chimed in with some background vocals, made it sound a little better.
Mm. You know what? I have some artist friends who tell me that, when your heart is in it, it's not about how good you are, it's about your heart. And that shines through. And so I expect that it was lovely to have some background vocals, but that your heart was also shining through as you sang and played. Um, and I think I want to touch on the idea of also that process of the songwriting, because in the beginning, it was something that felt right to you, that, this path was leading you into writing some songs with this material. And uh, at first it sounds like they were for you, for you first. And then it became this possibility that they might be for someone else in the world, another audience, right? And then it found the audience at this performance, at this showcase that you were a part of. And so it's sort of this, to me, that's also a bit of an evolution of a song, um, right? In the way that it begins, I think songs typically begin for the artist. Even if they're writing for someone else, there's a piece of them that it's for as well, you know? And not every song that an artist writes, a songwriter writes, is makes it out into the broader world. Some of them are just for us, right?
That's a great point. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking even just with writing, I struggled with that a little bit, I think, in the beginning of thinking, but maybe that's part of the grief process. Who is this for? Who's going to see this? Who's going to care about it besides me? And then at about the same time, maybe I realized that's all I needed is me. I also began to see other people do care about it. And it's not that I'm ever going to perform a lot of songs or do anything with them on a major scale, but it just, uh, that one little thing was rewarding to hear from other people, particularly medical staff and other bereaved parents that thought, if she could do it, maybe that's something I might want to try down the road.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of it, I think, that first and foremost, the expression through writing and music is an important therapeutic process for the person doing the writing. And so that's enough value right there, right? And then if and when it feels like being shared with the world, or a small part of a corner of the world,
Right.
um, then the way that I see that is that it's it's an opportunity for the 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 writer, the artist, to be witnessed and in some cases validated in their feelings and expression, right? um and so that can be cathartic too. It can be therapeutic to write it down or create a song, and it can be then therapeutic to share that, because you're being witnessed and validated. And then the audience receives something special too. And of course, it depends on each audience member what they receive from it. But sometimes your sharing of a story in that way that you didn't think might mean anything to anybody is just the story that someone else needs to hear to find hope and healing,
Mm.
right? And so whether it's your journal post, that you put online, or an op-ed article, or a song that you share, you're offering other people a window into hope and healing, and offering them an opportunity into validation of their experience, if they can relate, if what you've written or saying resonates with their experience too. And then, to me, the beauty of that is that we are all connected, and the things that connect us are stories about our shared lived experiences, right?
I so agree with that. You said that so well, Maureen. To me, and I didn't probably mention at the beginning, but I'm a retired educator. I taught high school for 25 plus years and taught history. And maybe that's part of it too, but the importance of stories and passing on legacies and sharing stories. And it really is our our main mode of connection and communication, all we have between one another. And so I think there, as a bereaved parent and a teacher, part of me is the witnessing part you mentioned, the educating part in a kind way, bringing people into what it's like, and then the making sure as a bereaved parent that your child's not forgotten, that your journey is not only remembered by you. That's just honest to say, but that's a lot of how I feel or have felt sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's actually really an important aspect, right? Because this is also legacy work, right?
Right.
You are carrying on Marshall's legacy by sharing his story, by sharing your connection, by sharing your art, whichever form it's taking. You are continuing to build his legacy of love in the world, you know, and that feels really important and good, I think, for a lot of people who use expressive arts to move through their grief and move it into the world and share it and connect through it, you know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. And I think it must feel like sometimes that Marshall would be looking to encourage you in this too.
I do. It's overwhelming sometimes, but then I catch myself and it's like a little voice on my shoulder, reminding me that I do think he's proud of me. And it's my way to keep kind of making more of things as he liked to do, even through my grief. It's a real gift, and I think I muddled through it the first few years, and now it's certainly still not easy, but it feels like a real gift, to day to day kind of keep parenting him in new ways and creating in new ways that share story and legacy.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I like that idea of muddling through because I think it applies to grief and I think it applies to the expressive arts process too, the creative process. In some ways, we sort of muddle through, stumbling along in the dark a bit, feeling our way until we reach the the light or the connections we're looking for. And that's true in grief and in a creative process and trying to bring ourselves through an experience. So
Yeah, as you're saying that, I'm thinking of things I know in that first probably year and a half, the things I wrote, I don't know that I would want to share a lot of them with other people because it was an outlet I needed for anger, to be honest, or sadness or curiosities and questions, and those were timely as well. But I think I learned from them too. And I don't want to sugarcoat anything, but I feel like I've evolved, as you said, as we've been talking about, into a more realistic kind of a hopeful, um, see how the arts have helped me in more ways than one. And it's all an evolution. You're exactly right.
yeah. I do think it's so important, those phases that you talk about going through where you're writing about anger or deep sadness. And it's true that those are not that's not the side we want to show the world often.
Right.
And when I do therapeutic writing work with people, I often talk to them about this practice that I call write, reflect, and release,
Mm.
where we write out what we need to, and maybe that's our big anger, or deep sadness, and we write out what we really are authentically feeling without censoring ourselves, and then maybe we read it over and reflect on it a little bit, but then we destroy it because
Mhm.
we don't need to hold on to that. We don't want to be stuck in it. It's really important to move it out of us and move through it. And so I think that that's really valuable writing, but I agree with you that that's not always the part we want to show the whole world,
Right. Right. I
right?
like that idea.
Yeah, right. Reflect and release is an opportunity to let some of the really messy parts out in a safer way, right? And I think it's very similar in my thoughts to the songwriting process, where often we write songs that aren't the ones that we're going to share. They're draft songs that we don't ever polish because maybe that's the song that needed to come out of us, because we were going to learn something about it, or we were expressing something messy, or we didn't, but the next song might be the one that is on the same theme and is the one we want to show to the world. Right.
And in a way, if I look at the entire experience I had with this young man, this son of mine, for 7-8 years, it was messy. It was never a straight line. But yet I can look back at it now, thanks to sort of some of these other creative channels, and see it as a gift, as a beautiful thing in the midst even of over all of this, the other challenge and sadness we went through. There was so much hope and joy, and I guess that's part of why I like to keep creating, because I don't want that to ever be lost.
Mm-hmm. And I think that is such a valuable way of thinking about it, that even with pain and chaos, we also have comfort and joy and beauty. And so we're always balancing all of it, the good and the challenging. We're balancing all the time, and arts can help us do that in a way that gives us many different opportunities to reflect from different angles on the experience that we're having, the ways that we think and feel about the experience, and our relationships with people and our relationships with ourselves. Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing this part of your journey with us as well. I think the more people hear stories like this, the more they might be willing to experiment and explore the idea of expressive arts in their grief journey, as a way of finding some hope and healing too.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. It's been very powerful for me. Like I said, it's not a straight line. It's got its ups and downs, but I'm getting a little stronger and finding some unique ways to keep moving through my grief by sharing story. And it's important to me. So thank you for the opportunity.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. All right. Thank you again. Thank you for listening to the Grief Stories podcast. I'm your host, Maureen Pollard. Please remember that grief is universal, but every person's experience of grief is unique. While our interviews are intended to help listeners feel validation and reassurance, we realize that these stories may be different from your own. Please visit our website, griefstories.org, for more stories of hope and healing.